Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February meeting of the Ontario Genealogical Society, the Essex County branch of the Ontario Genealogical Society. My name is Jim McTavish, and I'm the program coordinator for the branch. And as I said, I'd like to welcome you all to this evening. I'm sure you're going to find it a very interesting presentation we have tonight. I'd also like to issue a welcome to the people who are joining us online. They're live streaming our meetings now, and so be aware that if you don't have an opportunity to join us in person, they are always available on the website or online. Sorry, the live streaming. Okay. Just a couple of bits of information at this point. How many here are new to the branch meetings? Okay. Could I just ask, I'll tell you, I'd like to know what particular family names you're interested in. Because what we find is with the meetings, often several different people are looking at the same line and are not aware of it. So, if you could just, those people who are new, if you could just tell us what name or family you're interested in researching, that would be helpful. Maybe be somebody connecting with you tonight that's doing the same thing. We had some hands there. And the name you're researching?
Actually, I've been doing it for years and I'm practically done, but it's the Baldwins and the Cornwalls and Germans and let's see, Craig's Scottish side, and I think that's it. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much for sharing that. Someone else? Yes, in the back?
Douglas.
Douglas? Okay, thank you. Yes.
Bates, Hunt, and Reedy, R-E-E-D-Y.
R-E-E-D-Y, thank you.
Bates and Hunt.
In the back again?
Brazil and Toronto.
All right. Yes.
Dailies and Grams.
Haley and Graham?
And there are a lot of Muslims.
Okay, we'll see whether you make any connections here tonight. That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. A couple of bits of information for your benefit. We have a website and Facebook group and a Twitter account, and these are the ways in which you can access those. If you're interested and involved with those types of things. We've already covered that one. And as you may know, February is Black History Month. And one of the things we try to do in the branch is that 2 months of the year, we sort of have a meeting which has a theme associated with this type of activity. February, as indicated, we try and focus on something that has a Black history theme in it. And tonight's speaker certainly will be able to do that. The other one is in November. And in November's meeting, of course, we try and focus on Remembrance Day and have something associated with that. So otherwise, we're very eclectic. We are interested in getting speakers from a variety of different topics. And so if you know of someone or you yourself are willing to share some information, please don't hesitate to let members of the executive know that possibility. The website at the bottom, you'll notice, if you're interested in taking part in a variety of other activities related to Black History Month, again, there is a website that we have provided here. And what we will do is I'll leave the notes for these comments on the table. So at the end of the meeting, if you wish to copy those down, please feel free to do so. A couple of other OGS branch meetings. Lambton is scheduled for tomorrow night up in Sarnia, is it? And they're looking at genealogical research in the rain. Sounds like an interesting topic. Also, as it says there, the family history on the Isle of Wight in England. So it'll be live streamed as well from their website. So if you have an opportunity or are interested, please don't hesitate to sign on. February 25th at Ayers, that's at Harold Colchester Arena Community Center at 1:30. They have a Black History Month presentation by Milo Johnson, who has been exploring his own roots and has kindly offered to share his research with everyone. So that's February the 25th in Harold at the Community Center at the Fairgrounds. Something that we're pleased to announce is that if you have French language ancestral backgrounds, the French language group that has been basically closed for about a year has now been reopened in a different location. They used to be out in Puce, but they're now at open as of January the 26th on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And if you want more information on that, please give, you have to call at that number in case you're interested. It is located in the Maryvale complex. They can make use of. And on March the 11th in Kent, again, the Legacy Kent Black History will be presented by Virginia Travis. So again, live stream. So lots of opportunities to participate, whether you can attend in person or not. Here, next month, we have a interesting topic, a story about a World War I spy, Belgium to Essex County. And Goldie Howes, as it says there, will be presenting a story that I understand is quite intriguing. So please keep that in mind for next month. And again, as usual, it will be live streamed. The conference, the annual genealogical conference, it will be held in June. If you're interested, in the International Plaza Hotel at Toronto Airport, June 3 to 5. And again, if you're interested, we will have, I'll put that website on the table for you to access in the meeting. Tonight, we're very pleased to have Jane Buttery with us. Jane has, I see, written a number of novels that are historically based, and of course this one, again in February, is at least with a Black history theme that's woven through the characters and the activities and the events of her novel. The novel is On an Unexpected Friendship, Amherstburg, 1846. And she will tell us a little bit about the story which she has put together. And we are looking forward to that presentation. So, and I'd like to say as well, she has brought some of her books with her tonight, and they are available at the end of this program at the back here. So, okay.
That's for after, Jim.
Okay.
That's for after.
Okay.
That's for after the speaker.
Okay. I'm sorry, I still not sure what you want.
That's for after the speaker.
Okay. Thank you. There we go. And therefore, at this point in time, I'll turn the presentation over to Jane, and we'll all welcome her to tell us the story that she put together. Jane?
Thank you.
It's a real honor to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. This is what the book looks like, the original basing, on which I am basing my talk. I don't want to waste any time. because I've got quite a lot of slides to show you. And I go backwards before I go forward, because it is a historical background of this novel. Part of it is very interesting, in my mind, is how Amherstburg developed. It wasn't called Amherstburg at the time, it was based around Fort Malden. So to go on, there's why I did it, because I love history. I have a degree in history from England, and I met David Botsford, and David Botsford was a very knowledgeable man, written several books about Amherstburg area. And one of the stories he told me was that Amherstburg had an interracial school from 1843 to 1847. And I'll tell you why it was so brief in a minute. I was fascinated because, you see, I taught in Harrow, Malden, Colchester North, and I knew that we had many black children at school, and we loved them all the same. And I was delighted to find that there were black children learning along with James Dougal's children, his own children. In fact, he started the school. Now you know the name Dougal because it's the name of a road. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. This is Amherstburg as Mary Reynolds saw it in 1812. And you can see the Indians off to the side there and the soldiers in the middle looking over the river. And in the distance is the fort that dominated the area. The Elliott house was the point from which it was probably taken. And it was always called Elliott's Point. And I used that name in the book. Now, Matthew Elliott was an Indian interpreter, and he also became a colonel and became quite famous because he was a friend of Tecumseh and Brock and others. And he fought until he was way into his 70s. And it was only when he was 70 that he married again a very young girl of 21 called Sarah Donovan Elliott. And obviously, he didn't want to die without leaving a family. He did have an Indian wife, and that son unfortunately was killed at one of the battles. So he married Sarah. They had one child in 1811 and another one in 1813. And by 1814, poor old Matthew was dead. And he didn't even die in Amherstburg because they'd had to get out of it because of the war and the situation there. So they retreated. And this shows, oh dear, I can't go away from this, but you can see the big island in the middle, and that's the area with Amherstburg. Does this make a light? No, it doesn't. Anyway, there's Tecumseh and Proctor having a row about why they shouldn't move out of Amherstburg in Tecumseh's mind. And Proctor's, come on, let's get out and burn the fort. So that's really what happened. And Tecumseh was a very strong man, as you know, with strong opinions, and went on fighting right to the bitter end and was killed at Moravian Town. And you can visit that area and see the plaque there. Sarah Elliott, her boys took refuge in Montreal. Her husband followed, and as I said, he died out of Amherstburg. One interesting fact about Matthew Elliott is a bit of a snob. He insisted that Sarah didn't remarry, and if she did, she would lose her land, and that land was to be kept for his two boys who had to grow up as gentlemen. Francis Gore Elliott was sent to Montreal to the seminary, and he later became a missionary priest in my parish in Harrow, Christchurch, Colchester, and his brother became the treasurer of Amherstburg. So the Elliott connection was there. Now Matthew came, I didn't tell you at first, but he came with about 60 slaves in 1784. And his sons grew up not liking slavery, so they were anti-slavery abolitionists, and we don't hear of anything unpleasant during their time. And of course, by 1793, Simcoe had said anybody who was a slave was free at 25, and by 1833, it was the abolition of slavery in the British Empire and Commonwealth. These are interesting houses because this one on this side is where the slaves might have lived, and that's the family home with the chimney. That house was renovated. I will show it to you in a later slide. And those of us living in that area know it as the Duffy House. Not the hotel, but the house where we used to get the boblo boat. Remember the boblo boat? Just before it, there was rather a grand brick house. That's that house done up. But it was originally built by Robert Barclay Elliott in 1835. They still employed black people, but they were not slaves. And that's a typical early log house. The reason I put that in is that we have a log house somewhere down towards Anna that was a really early log house. And I suspect that the family that I bring up in my book, a real family, by the way, Peter Stokes, built himself a log house like that in the new settlement. And the new settlement was later called Harrow. But it wasn't Harrow for a long time. If you know Harrow at all, it had all kinds of names. And one was Munger's Corner. But that's another story. The building down there is a bit like the houses that were built for the soldiers. You know, after the rebellion, they realized they should have some soldiers, some regulars there again. And the 31st Regiment had been disbanded, so they brought them back. They were really old soldiers, but they let them, they had this little house. I think they have a replica near the Park House now. I mentioned Francis Gore Elliott. I don't have a picture of his brother, but Francis being our rector, we have one, because I wrote a book about our church. And Francis is rather good looking. Maybe Matthew Elliott was too. And that's the church, shape of the church, and it's the same shape as the church in Amherstburg because they were built around the same time. And it collapsed virtually because they changed the shape of the windows. And then also there was erosion, a lot of erosion. Older people in our parish can remember playing baseball out beyond the church. I mean, it's gone now, it's just a cemetery. So the reason why the church wasn't started earlier, they had marriages there from 1805. There was an Indian princess in the cemetery. We still have it, you can still look at it. And the earliest burial that Richard Pollard did was 1806 of Stephen Brush, whose descendant, comes to our church to this day. John Brush, he's a local farmer. And so Christ Church started after Pollard came back, after the war. Why do I go back so far? Because you see, it was the war that led black people to coming to Canada. Those soldiers in Detroit who went back and said, hey, they're letting blacks go free in Canada after they're 25, and they started coming. And quite a lot of them came. And so between the end of the war, they say, certainly in the 1820s until the 1850s, there was a trickle of black people all the time coming across the river and Lake Erie. All sorts of stories that I remember Mr. Botford telling us. This is the church in Amherstburg, and that comes into my story because the Reverend Mack, who took over this church later on in 1824 and was still there in 1840s, actually took the boy in my story to Toronto to pick up his cousins. That's the way I saw it anyway. But we do know for a fact from the research at the University of Waterloo that 3 girls came to Amherstburg under the care of the Reverend Mack until they were old enough, and he would have seen that they had some sort of education and a living because their parents had died at sea. And that's because they were Irish and they came over in the coffin ships, which were awful. I have pictures of the coffin ships in my book. So from the beginning of the 18th century anyway, there were slaves, as I said. Then this is just a review of the bill in 1793. And then the loyalty of the African Canadians who were here was pretty obvious. And so in 1819, all Black residents of Upper Canada were free and protected by British law. And by 1833, on August the 1st, it was freedom of slavery. Up in there, I discovered that in an old book of the false bottom and the way people came across, one of the ways they came across. A wonderful story of somebody coming across the ice in the winter that Dave Botford told me too. And of course, we all know about Harriet Tubman. If you've ever seen Leslie McCready act, she does a wonderful job of that. I saw her at a conference in the old Amherstburg church, and she was fantastic. So Harriet Tubman used to go along, tell them they get freedom in Canada, and she'd sing Way Down Roses, you know, that song. And that would be a clue that they'd find their way. Look at the age she died at, 90. I think God let her live a long time because she was such a good person. Wonderful woman. Now, Peter Stokes, who's up in the corner there, who's on my book, was the son of Josiah Stokes. And Josiah Stokes became an itinerant Baptist minister. Now, I have to be truthful and say, Peter Stokes didn't really get born until 1843, but I put his age back a bit because I wanted him 11 or 12 in 1845. And they escaped from Kentucky about the same time as Josiah Henson. So they would have known Josiah. And I wonder if that's why Peter Stokes was the father. Peter called his son Josiah, and he's known as Josh in the book. Henry Bibb, you must have heard of, was an escaped slave. He had a terrible life. He was intelligent, wanted to get away from slavery, and he wrote a book later after he was married the second time. He had to teach himself to read and write. And he became a very important abolitionist in our area because he started the Fugitive Slave newspaper in the 1850s. And he did this with Mary Ann Shadd, and then she left the area and went more towards Chatham, had a bit of a disagreement. But the work went on. Unfortunately, Bibb died in 1854. While he was helping the slaves, providing temporary housing, clothes, and things like that, just like we're doing for Syrians today, in a way. His wife, Mary Miles Bibb, was a teacher. So she taught in the area. And she was more successful after he died. She had more time to do the teaching. It was very important to her. So this is a little bit more about Henry Bibb, and that's the cover of his first book. I also read that book, by the way, that was advertised at the beginning, The Fugitive Slave Narratives. We have it in the library in Harrow, and it was written and came out in 1856, not too long after Bibb's own story, which came out in 1852. Very contemporary stories of how hard it was. He was terribly abused and suffered a lot, like many slaves and like Josiah. These are homes that they had later on. That's a home at the top that I believe the McCurdy family lived in at one time. And at the bottom is the renovated Nasby Church. And on the side is a little bit of the museum in white there. And inside the museum, if you've never been there, they have an imitation of the log cabin that the Taylor family came to. And the Taylors came over the Detroit River in the ship called the Pearl in 1850. So I had the family going to come over in the Pearl. You learn these bits, you adapt it, put them in the wrong place perhaps. But that's what historical fiction is. So don't count on me being absolutely right. Here is the important part for the Black people in our area, was they got a lot of land as a result of the rebellion. They were part of the Black Militia, and they were very proud of what they achieved on January the 8th, 1838. On that day, the schooner Anne came down the river, started bombarding Amherstburg and the fort, and the soldiers were called out, but they took a long time. The Black Militia got there first, and they shot at the boat, and they must have got the man with the rudder, steering it, and so the boat went a bit the wrong way, and they waded into the water, very icy, and captured 21 people. So by the time the regulars got there, they were on shore, more or less. As a result of that, there were a lot of men who got land in the area. And one of them was the Matthews family, because I know they're in Harrow, and they got that land then, and they live on the third concession still. And I taught Matthews and Davis's. So I'm really pleased that I have that link, direct link, having taught Robert and Richard. And so it was a very important thing that happened that January the 8th for Canada. And those men who were captured that day were sent to prison. Some were sent to Australia as convicts. So there we have a link with the Commonwealth. There's the loyal Black Militia, a little bit later. It's an old picture. They were the ones who survived. You can tell it's later because look at the dress of the men at that far left end of my picture. It's certainly about 1880, I would say. And there's some of the newer ones as well, but they were so proud of what they achieved. And Josiah Henson did have land offered to him. He didn't want, it wasn't enough. He decided to leave it, and he went up to Dresden, as you know. In my book is the story of the rebellion, told by the man who kept the livery stable. And his name was Tom Fry. And I imagine that his son Henry went to school with Josh at the Dougal School. Amherstburg, by the time the slaves were there, was a very busy port. I read that there were as many as 750 boats coming in there every day, some little, some big. And there was a very famous boat that was one of the first steamers built there. It was called the Earl Cathcart. And so it was so famous, I think it was the Park family who might have had it built. And so I have Josh and his friend Seamus going on the boat with the Reverend Mac to Toronto to find the cousins who were missing. So this is the type of boat that they would have gone on. This city of Detroit, there was a famous one called the Walk on the Water in this area, and it unfortunately didn't last long, went down. This is a typical lighthouse. The lighthouse is still on Boblo today, and that lighthouse goes back to 1846, right on the date I wanted. So I'm delighted by that. That's another lighthouse below, the Port Doyle one, and they would have seen that. And it's still standing. I always think that's interesting. If only a lighthouse could speak. I remember when I was in Jerusalem, I kept thinking if only these olive trees could speak, because they were 1,000 years old or more. Anyway, Pointe Blanc was where the Indians would have camped in the war time, and was James Hackett went to live there with his whole family as lighthouse keeper. Now this is a map of Amherstburg, looking towards the Detroit River, and you see those little protruding bits out into the river at the top of the map, which is the north of the map. The very last one has behind it the words, the Dougal School. Can you see that? That's where they went to school. Now, why did I think that was so interesting? The reason is James Dougal was quite a prosperous merchant by that time. And he had a girl, boys, and he wanted them to be educated well. So he arranged for his cousin, who had been educated in Edinburgh, to come to Amherstburg and be the teacher and the Presbyterian minister. I wish I had a pointer. But anyway, it's hard to show you, but going back here, you will, on this side of the map, on this side of the map, right here, you see a cross. That's a Presbyterian church. Right next to it, thank you. Right next to it, it says Alexander's grocery store. Can you see what I mean? There's Alexander's. He was the only black grocer, the only black general store man, and right next to the Presbyterian church. As a result, he sent his son to the school. Later on, he would have sent him. And Josh, I didn't know if they were related, but I made them related. Josh was then living with Uncle Jim Alexander at his store, working there because his parents were in the new settlement. And he went to school with Reverend Payton, who lived just next door. It seems an obvious thing to do. So they would go all the way down here, around there, to the Dougal School. Now the Dougal School doesn't, and the fort was over there, by the way. And Seamus lived in the shacks up on Richmond, on this side of Richmond. which wasn't too good at the time. David Botsford, by the way, lived way over here, and the Botsfords had lived there for 100 years on the third concession, sort of Alma Street. And that is where the Maloney's had some land. And eventually in my story, I have Seamus Maloney's father being given land or given a place to live by Michael Maloney, who was a resident of Amherstburg. And Seamus's father and Michael Maloney get along. They have the same name, Maloney, so they help each other. And they both agree to work the land together, and that's how that happened in my story. Just a nice, friendly situation. Seamus and Josh meet and don't really hit it off straight away. Seamus is put out. You've no idea what it's like coming over in one of those ships. You haven't had to settle in a foreign land. And Seamus said, and Josh replies, oh yes, I have. My father brought us here to avoid slavery. So eventually they get along. Josh goes to school, like I told you, the Fry Boy is. I don't know if Josh went there, but I'm guessing that some kids went, so he would have won. And he starts to teach Seamus to read. Seamus' family was so poor, they were starving in Ireland. They were sent over in 1845 probably. And he never learned to read properly. So Josh helps him. And Reverend Peyton helps. So that's sort of interesting for me. And they meet, by the way, at this place I called Elliott's Point, which is, whenever I got my light, there's Elliott's Point, and this was the Elliott house. That was McLeod's mill, and this was the tannery. Just imagine the smell from that. And this is the Anglican church that I showed you was built later, was being built by them. This is the Elliott house as it looks. Do you recognize it? It was the one that was near Boblo. Well, that's the renovated house. Lived in by Robert Barclay Elliott, treasurer of Amherstburg. And there wasn't a bank around. So he thought he'd better bury the money. Nobody's found it. Have you ever heard that story? Got that one as well. I don't know if people went looking, but apparently that's what happened to the money. And when he died, nobody could find it. His father had called his two sons after two famous soldiers, and Barclay was the name of the man who was defeated at the Battle of Detroit, you know, when Detroit was by the Americans in 1812. Now there's the Dougal School information again that I told you. Robert Payden, who came, had liberal views. He stayed in the town till 1849. He was eventually brought up by the Presbyterian Church on charges of heresy. And a very good historian in my group of heirs, Edith Woodbridge, you may have heard of Edith, found that out, and I got the document from her. And he was charged of heresy because he said people are not predestined to go to heaven. There's free will involved, and they can make the choice, and that's what they didn't like. So he left, and he formed the Unitarian Evangelical Union Church in Hamilton. Interesting. Now, give you a bit of the background on why the Irish came, because even though it's Black History Month, it was a time in Amherstburg of prejudice against Blacks and against Irish. They all face it. If they're different, if they're new. I know it took me about 20 years to be called Jane by people. I was Mrs. Buttery all the time. It takes a long time. So they had a terrible blight, as you know, in 1845. They were starving, and these are some pictures. And these are the coffin chips. Yes, I did reproduce them here. Really push people in all together. And they got so sick. And we knew that the Hart family had lost a mother and a child on board. In fact, Seamus says that he's lost a sister on one of the boats coming over earlier. They used to keep them on gross eel, if you remember, to see if they were well enough to travel on into Quebec and Ontario. Now, I told you that Josh and Seamus went with Reverend Mag to bring the Hart girls back, and they had a journey through from Amherstburg to Chatham to Cornwall, through the fairly new Welland Canal. It was only built in 1829, and I tried to describe how long that journey would have taken. People said probably about a week at least, to Toronto, and then they come back. I thought a different way, just to make it interesting, to Niagara Falls, but there wasn't any way to continue by boat, so they had to go by train. And when they were waiting for the train, the slave captors were around. You do those sort of things just to maintain dramatic appeal, you know. Now, this is what they probably saw when they traveled. Bigger boats, the brigs at the bottom, the lovely sailor, the schooners, and the paddle boats were beginning. The boys would have seen, as I said, the lighthouse. That's the Peely Island Lighthouse, another one built even earlier. And this is an old sketch of Toronto. Now, down there, this is Queen Street. And down there on Queen Street, I don't know which of these buildings, but let's imagine it might be this one, was what they called the Toronto Asylum, which is where they kept orphans when they were off the boats and didn't have any relatives. And they had a continuous dose of porridge, and they might have meat once a week. Now, they had some vegetables, but they did have an awful lot of porridge. And this is Amherstburg a little bit later. Again, a McCurdy picture. It was then well established. As you know, Dr. Park had come to Amherstburg. The house, that's the Park House, had been floated down the river as early as 1796. The Park family, who were merchants, well established there, and their brother, younger brother, has the John R. Park homestead, which is nearer me. And I'm writing a book about that now. Not straightforward, but child's book. Tobacco farming came here because of black loyalists. After all, the people who came in as slaves became loyalists. And they did a tremendous amount for farming because that's where they had been employed. So tobacco farming there, grain farming, and they reckoned that they could work 4 acres together and make quite a bit of money. I'm always sad when I find out, because I live near Pleasant Valley off the McCormick Road. And I'm told that blacks had that land. It's very heavy land. But they could not all make a go of it there. It's very heavy clay though. And so they had to lose their land after working it for a few years. I think that's very sad. So you have names like Pleasant Valley and Gilead, you know, and you think of them starting off there afresh. The roads were improved. There was a man called Henry Wright in our area who was assigned the job of improving the places where people walk, and he put planks down. If you go to the Detroit Museum, the History Museum, you can walk on roads like that, cobble and plank-sided. It's fascinating. I've taken every visitor I've had from England there. So, oh my. There's Dr. Potts and the commiserate building. See there, Josh and Seamus and anybody living in Amherstburg, all the new slaves who were free would come in and they'd see these buildings right on the riverfront just about. But unfortunately, and this is where my story is, prejudice set in. By about the 1840s, there were 27% black. Do you know that today there's still only 27% black in Amherstburg? I found that out when I was teaching at Anderton, which is nearby. And anyway, there was prejudice. So part of my story is about a gang of boys who were bullies, who bullied this boy, Josh. And Josh didn't want to fight anybody. But Seamus had the Irish spirit, you know. You can see how that went. Anyway, as a result of the prejudice, and that comes out in chapter 5 too, because the blacks were talking about the need for their own school. We will get better treatment if we have our own school. We can let our children go far. Well, actually, it was a white minister in Chatham who came to Buxton area and established a school. As you know, that you may have heard of, it was famous. And people even wanted to send their white children there. It was so good. So I pretended that Josh would eventually go to learn how to become a teacher by going to Dr. King's school. The settlement in Buxton didn't last because when the black people there realized they could go back to America and fight for their freedom, a lot of them went back. But good work had been done ahead, so many of them became doctors and other people in authority in the army. So it was really good to know. There's another chap from our area. I just mentioned him in a couple of lines. And his, oh dear. The real McCoy. You heard of the real McCoy? He was born in Colchester in 1844. And I just refer to him as a very clever little boy. He was older in my story, who asked lots of questions. And so his father and mother, as you know, went on to Detroit, and he was educated and eventually went to Edinburgh and became an engineer. So that was a very good story to hear about. I found it was a fascinating time to read about Amherstburg. And I'd had this conflict of prejudice and the growing dislike of the Irish and the blacks. It made for a good story and some sort of resolution at the end. And that picture at the bottom there is the inside of the Nazarene Church here. And here is the inside of part of Fort Malden with the soldiers. It's a very bad picture I took, I'm sorry. And there's the Nazarene Church again. Oh yes, this is a bit later, but did you know that Fort Malden's big building where the museum is today was an asylum for people who weren't quite right in the head? And that is a typical store, Heritage Village off the Town Line. And that, I think, is typical of the time too. So that one is a brick one, but they say it was built in the middle of the century. That's the old Gordon house, and that's Dr. Park's place. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the buildings, hearing about some of the people. I'm willing to take questions if you like. One thing I want to read to you, because it's specifically about Black people, okay? Just the beginning of my book. Josh is frightened. He's walking around the road, and he's wondering if Billy and his gang will get him. He'd never be able to escape the Wharton gang carrying this big crop for Mr. Botsford. Then he smiled when he thought of his father's words. Never forget, Josh, you be a free man here. You get some learning, go far, and stand up for yourself. That's why I got us all out of that there plantation in Kentucky. Don't you ever forget it. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions? Okay,
I have a question. How many books in total have you done? How many books have you done in total?
I've written 12 books. I have a motto. My motto is to celebrate where we all live through books that educate and entertain. I hope I have done that a bit today. And my other book that I'm really pleased with is about Tecumseh's sister and Catherine Malott Gertie, and it's called Two at the Crossroads. And I went backwards to the War of 1812-14. Again, Catherine was a captive of the Shawnee, lived with them for 4 years, and she lived until she was 88 years old. Mainly, I think, because she walked from Colchester to Kingsville for church on Saturday on a regular basis when she was in her 50s. Amazing, isn't it? That's just an extra thing.
Jane, on behalf of the OGS-Essex County branch, I'd like to thank you so much for a wonderful story. And I think we're all looking forward to having an opportunity to see your books and to read the stories you've written. Thank you so much.
Thank you, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
On our Facebook group, we were discussing Black History Month, and somebody sent this web link in, and I went to the website, and I was fascinated by the book that has been transcribed and indexed, and it's about, just as it says, it's stories of fugitive slaves in Canada related by themselves. So they are actually speaking, and it was written down. So for example, the next slide. So on the right-hand side is actually the index, so it's all indexed, and as you can see, there's indexed of people that were in Windsor, Sandwich, Amherstburg, Colchester, basically all of Ontario where anybody landed, plus there's also the other states. And then this is just an example of some of the things that are in this book. So it's a fantastic book. I know at the Kent branch, we actually have a hardcover, we have a copy of it, but I don't know if we have a copy of it. Do you know, Linda? I'm not sure. We could find out if there's a copy if you want to browse, but the entire book is online for free. So it's an interesting read, interesting and very sad, obviously. But it was just one little tidbit that I found and I thought I would share because it's just fascinating. I read the whole thing. It's just a fascinating book, and it's available for free online. So thank goodness these people transcribed it and made it available. So that was what the last two slides were about.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you coming. Please stay around, and Jane has some of her books available for you if you're interested in pursuing it. And Jane, where else are they available if we wanted to get some?
Well, I just left some at the university because Martin wanted them. I keep them, and I come into Windsor quite a lot. I can't find bookshops that will take my books and give me a reasonable amount of money back because I'm a publisher as well. Do you know that if you put your books with Indigo or one of those chapter, they take 40% of the book. I can't afford to do that. I'd rather give the books cheaper. So when I'm somewhere, this book sells for $12.95. I sell it for $10. I don't have to give the shops the money. So that's what I do. And the other one is $16.95 at the university, and I sell it for $15. That kind of thing. All right? So,
And
and I have a website, and I'm going to, I do, it's being updated right now, and it works with PayPal. And I deliver in Windsor and this whole area.
wonderful.
Okay.
Jane, thank you very much again. I appreciate it. And please enjoy the rest of the evening here and chat with each other and socialize. And certainly Jane's books are available. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks for listening.
How you doing?